This painting looks like a typical 19th century scene from the Australian countryside. A woolshed, a group of men, and a few sheep that are being worked on. But if you look a bit closer, you realize this isn't just a painting of rural labor, it's a national symbol. This painting is titled Shearing the Rams, and it was painted by Tomroberts in 1890. It's widely considered to be the most iconic painting of Australian Impressionism, and there are several reasons for it. It's a work that doesn't just show what life looked like, but what it felt like to be in Australia at the end of the 19th century. In this video, I'm going to explore how this painting came to be, the story it tells, and what it reveals about the artist who made it. As you'll discover, Shearing the Rams is definitely more than a snapshot of a working day. It's a piece of cultural identity, built from over 70 drawings and months of fieldwork. And then there's a smiling child who isn't exactly who he appears to be. As in most of my videos, let's begin with the painter himself, a man known by his friends as Bulldog. Tomroberts was born in 1856 in Dorchester, England, but migrated with his family to Australia as a young teenager in 1869. They settled in Collingwood, a suburb of Melbourne, and he started his career as an assistant photographer. At night, he studied art under Swiss-born painter Louis Bouvelot, a man who unwittingly would play a major role in the development of the Heidelberg School. He was persistent, that's for sure, and Bulldog decided to move to Europe to pursue his dream to become a full-time artist. Between 1881 and 1884, he studied at the Royal Academy in London. He traveled frequently, often together with John Russell, the man who famously befriended Vincent van Gogh and even painted a portrait of the Dutch painter. It's during this period that he became familiar with Impressionism and the art of painting outdoors. And here's where things get interesting. Around the same time, during the early 1880s, he became acquainted with the works of Jules Bastien Lepage. The French painter used a distinctive sense of naturalism in his paintings, which often depicted peasants at work. Just look at how he painted these female workers who seemingly overflow with joy as they do harsh labor. Roberts brought those ideas back with him to Australia and was determined to create something equally grounded in his own environment. In 1888, while visiting Brocklesby Station in New South Wales, Roberts found the perfect subject to match this ambition. The shearing shed was filled with movement, sweat, dust, and sun. It was the perfect recipe to paint the picture. But there's more. Tom didn't pick up his brushes and started painting straight away like his impressionist colleagues. He spent countless hours at the station observing the shearers, learning how they worked, sketching the tools, the gestures, and the poses. During this period, which started in the spring of 1888 and lasted well into 1890, he produced over 70 preparatory drawings. He presumably returned to his studio in Melbourne with all this material and began constructing the painting like a scene in a play. At least, that's what was presumed for well over a century. More recent analysis uncovered paint used in the work at the shearing shed, which might give us a clue that Roberts did paint at least some of this painting on the spot. When you look at the painting, you can feel that Tom really tried to outdo himself. The shearers are dedicated to their work, and their arms are strained. The floor is scattered with wool, the space broken up by wooden posts and angled shadows. Light filters through the openings in the shed's walls, creating a haze that softens everything inside. One figure in particular stands out, the smiling tar boy at the center. It's a small, cheerful face in a scene dominated by adult labor. The tar boy was someone who was responsible for applying antiseptic tar to cuts on the sheep. But the little boy isn't who he appears to be at first glance. In reality, this wasn't a tar boy at all because Roberts used 9-year-old Susan Bourne, a local girl, as his model. It's a quiet human touch in a painting otherwise filled with movement and grit, and the little girl is the only person who makes eye contact with the viewer. Most important paintings in the 1880s still focused on historical scenes, portraits of nobility, or idealized landscapes. Just like his colleague Impressionists in Europe, Roberts wanted something different, and there was a special reason for that. The 1880s marked the first decade in Australia when Australian-born Europeans outnumbered European-born citizens in the country. As you might expect, there was a growing sense of national pride because of this, and in this spirit, Tom Roberts started painting Shearing the Rams. He was a leading member of what would later be called the Heidelberg School, a group of Australian painters who are also known as the Australian Impressionists. Along with Archer Streeton and Frederick McCubbin, Roberts produced paintings that made Australian life the center of Australian art. The group lived a bohemian lifestyle and mostly painted the area of Heidelberg, a rural area back then on the outskirts of Melbourne. For Tom Roberts and several of his colleagues, it went much further than merely bringing Impressionism to Australia. The painter once said, "Paint what you love and love what you paint," so I chose to express the meaning and spirit of strong masculine labor. This phrase by Bulldog perfectly sums up Shearing the Rams. It's probably for this reason that most Australians who laid eyes upon it since 1890 became just a little prouder of their home country. So what happened when Roberts finally unveiled Shearing the Rams in 1890 in his studio at Grosvenor Chambers on Collins Street, Melbourne? Surprisingly enough, the reception was rather mixed, as some critics thought it was too rough and ordinary. They expected smooth finishes and classical themes, so definitely not a dusty shearing shed in a remote part of the country. But many more immediately understood what Roberts had done, as he had taken a familiar scene and turned it into something monumental. He had shown that Australia's own stories were worthy of being painted. Roberts hoped that the National Gallery of Victoria would buy the work, but because of the reasons mentioned earlier, they respectfully declined. Instead, he sold it to an art dealer for just 350 guineas, and after that, the painting passed through private hands for decades. It wasn't until 1932, more than 40 years later, that the National Gallery of Victoria finally acquired it. Ironically, this was the year following the death of Tom Roberts, a man who also painted another iconic work in Australian history titled The Big Picture. This monumental painting depicts the opening of the first Parliament of Australia at the Royal Exhibition Building in Melbourne on May 9, 1901. When Shearing the Rams entered the National Gallery of Victoria, it had already become one of the best recognized paintings in the country. It had appeared in books, postcards, posters, and therefore schoolchildren across Australia had grown up knowing it. It's fair to conclude that in the 20th century, it became not just a painting, but a piece of national memory. And yet, when you stand in front of it today, what strikes you isn't just the history, but the feeling it conveys. And here's what strikes me the most. He didn't need to exaggerate or dramatize. The real story was already there. You can feel it in the movements of the shearers and the timeless rhythm of this important labor in Australian history. Shearing the Rams by Tom Roberts was painted as the ultimate sign of respect for the people who built the wealth of a nation with their bare hands.